Good day, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the CEO Mastermind .ai podcast. Super excited to have David Jenyns here. He's coming all the way from Australia. We're having this conversation around systems and the unlock. Today, it's really a special treat. I think there's a framework here that David will talk about, where you are in the scalability, the four pillars. And for me, is what have really resonated with the work. Because a lot of people are talking about the wrong things in this world, which is always scalable, but they're not thinking about, is it saleable? And so we'll dive into this model that he describes in his book. But before we get on to that, I would love if you can do just a quick introduction. I know your story, haven't been in your body of work, but if you can just give a little intro about yourself, how you started, and a little bit of the Michael Gerber story as well, too, would be great.
Yeah, perfect. I've been a business owner since as long as I can remember. Left school and then didn't do uni and thought, right, I'm just going to get stuck into business. And over the years, I've tried a huge variety of things, everything from importing products from China to running a rock and roll clothing music store to having a digital agency and a video production business. I'm most well known for probably my last business, which was Melbourne SEO Services. And that was really a business, at least, that trapped me for a good number of years until I systemized myself out of the operations. And then that's when I founded Systemology. So Systemology, the whole idea is I felt like everybody talks about systems and processes and you've got to document, and we all know this as small business owners. I'd read all the books, the E-Myth, Traction, Scaling Up, Built to Sell. I'd read all the books like many of your listeners, but then I just got stuck on okay, well, where do I get started? What do I do first? How do I actually systemize a business? And that's where I felt there wasn't much work, and that was the birth of Systemology. And it was funny, just before I finished off my last business, which was Melbourne SEO Services, before I came into Systemology, I got an email just completely out of the blue from a lady called Luzdelia Gerber, which was Michael Gerber's wife. And she said, look, Michael is launching the last book in his E-Myth series. And she happened to see some work that I did completely unrelated to my systems and processes side of the business. It was my last book, just before Systemology, called Authority Content from the digital agency. And she said, I saw you do this book launch and I'm wondering, can you do a book launch for Michael Gerber? And I just about stumbled over my words and was like, oh, yes, I was a little bit starstruck that I was going to get this opportunity. And then I worked with Michael to launch that book. And it was just an amazing experience to work incredibly closely and form a great relationship. And really that has shaped a lot of the second part of my career and where Systemology and System Hub has gone. And I was quite lucky to have him write the foreword for my book. And that's just been an amazing springboard into this new business, and now very much my passion, which is helping business owners get off the tools and build a business, become a true business owner, something that is a profitable enterprise that works without them. And I help people bridge that gap, because it's almost like there's this gap where you're the solo person or you've got a small team around you, but the business is very dependent on you. And then the gap to get to the other side is, how do you build something that delivers your core product or service that isn't dependent on you? And it's that gap there that I've probably spent the last 8 to 10 years focusing on. How do you bridge that gap?
Makes sense. And I'm sure, knowing my audience, they probably know who Michael Gerber is. But if you don't know Michael Gerber, I will bet a ton of money one of his most famous saying, which is, you're working on the business or you're working in the business. And, vast majority of people and organizations, all the way up to 9 figures, they're stuck in the in part, including even large Fortune. I've been in large Fortune 500s, and a lot of leaders, a lot of divisions, they're stuck in. They don't use these systems. So really, this is just as good for a 3-person operation with multiple partners, or it'd be good for a 3,000-4,000 person division too. I think you take the concepts and apply them, One of the things I love that you said, and I'd like to get into the 4 stages of business systemization chart, because what I love is I'm obsessed with optimization and simplification, and that too is also your mantra. So for the audience, can you kind of quickly walk through the 4 stages of business systemization?
This is perfect timing because I'm just starting to reshape the way that I think about these 4 stages, and I've actually tweaked the final stage. So the 4 stages, we've worked with literally thousands of companies, and I found that businesses typically fall into one of 4 categories when they're on the journey towards systemization. The first one is survival mode. That's where everything is very key person dependent, typically very dependent on the business owner. There aren't really any processes in place. The team really just makes things up as they go. And it's almost like this roller coaster, like where they've got work and they're doing the work, doing the work, doing the work, and then they finish that work, and then they've got to focus on getting the work, getting the work, getting the work, and then they get the work, and then they got to focus on doing the work. And it's just this up and down roller coaster of survival mode where they're just putting out fires. The next stage is what I call stationary. That's where you start to get a few key team members around you that know how to do the work, but it's all trapped inside their head. So it's not as dependent on the business owner, but oftentimes you've got this key person dependency where, hey, Sally issues out the invoices, and if Sally doesn't come in on Wednesday, invoices don't get issued out. And that stationary mode, you very quickly hit a glass ceiling with how big you can actually grow because you're so tied to these individuals. The key to move through that stage is actually to get the IP out of their head, figure out what it is that they're doing and make that knowledge transferable. And that helps you get to what I call scalable, which is the next step up, which is where you start to have some systems and processes documented, but everything's scattered everywhere and it's a little bit clunky and you have to remind your team to follow process. You're just starting to get the foundations in place, but it hasn't quite clicked into gear. And then the final stage is what you mentioned, this idea of saleable. And it's not that you're going to sell your business, but rather someone would want to buy your business. So that's actually the little tweak that I'm making to the language. And while it was nice to have 4 S's there with survival, stationary, scalable, and saleable, I realized as business leaders, I think saleable makes sense, but for your team, saleable doesn't. I've actually been chatting with some team members and systems champions, and they're worried that, we're selling the business here. Whereas it's more about building a business that someone would want to buy, which means you've got the entire business systemized, you've got it documented, there's a way of doing things, and a real giveaway when you reach that final stage is the team says, this is how we do things here. Once you've got a way of doing things, that's the key that you've kind of made it to this final stage, which I'm now referring more to as buyable rather than saleable.
Yeah, that's a great nuance. Actually, I can, as a leader, I'm always thinking like, I don't remember who I heard it, but it was, having working in a lot of public companies, you're always thinking as a business leader, you have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize enterprise value. But as an entrepreneur, you should always look at your net worth and are the steps you're taking making the organization better. Even when you talk about systems in the book, like when you have things documented, you can get higher multiples. And I think a lot of organizations out there, a lot of people talk about build a scalable company, which to your point, you can get there. But for me, what I loved is, viable now, but sellable. I think that is the euphoria moment because you really have optimized something that doesn't run without you and could unlock people and have infinite scalability. And that's the key piece that I love was the tip of that pyramid, for the listeners. I'll put it all in the show notes, by the way, where to get your book and find you and resources and whatnot, and your podcast as well. Yeah. But for me, that struck like a lightning bolt in my head. Because everyone talks about scalable and it gets stuck there. And, there's the black box and the tribal knowledge, and that's where the stationary level is. So there's a lot of people trying to get you from stationary to scalable. Not a lot of people trying to get you to that higher level of operation. And so, yeah.
I think that distinction there you made is spot on, where people get trapped at scalable because everybody thinks, I want to build a scalable business, but all of the actual payoff and reward that comes from getting a systems culture is actually on that final stage, because you don't want to have to be reminding your staff always to follow process. You don't want to still have some level of key person dependency, and you want to achieve a level of excellence. And probably the big lesson I've learned after doing this for a long time, there is no finish line to this. Like, the reality is we're building a culture, a way of doing things, and you will have to continue to operate this way. Like, you don't look at McDonald's and think, they've systemized and they're done now. Like, they're constantly improving their systems and their processes. This is now just who they are. And we need to get to that point where this is just embedded in the DNA and the culture of your organization.
Yeah, it's you're exactly right. I think it's how we do things is this is how we do things. Like you said, that's the best way to get there. It is important to be fanatical about optimization, not to the point that it cripples you, but to the point that you have regular checkpoints to make sure, are we doing the best? And if nothing in the world changed around us, for sure there's a finish line, but the world is constantly changing. November 2022. So if you lived in a static environment, you might say there's a finish line and we've optimized it, but people are changing, social trends are changing, consumer needs are changing, competition changes. Someone's always, even when you're at the top of the hill, that's when you have to push harder. One of my favorite quotes, that's about 10 years ago from Avis, said, we work harder because we're number two. But it's just that essence of, we're just chasing and trying to optimize. And that is a critical differentiation. And that's where, I've worked for private equity as well. And that's where you get arbitrage. When you have a business that's viable, you buy something, let's say stationary, you build something. But instead of getting a 4, 5, or 6 multiple, because you have a non-optimized business, but it's in a great industry, great trend, got some good things, like a scalable business, you could probably double or triple the multiple potentially, depending on the industry and the trend, by getting to this level. So there's real value financially, and also I think there's real value from a health perspective as well. Because if you're a business owner and you're not burning the midnight oil 70 hours a week, you start, and this is why a lot of people close businesses, they start resenting their business and their customer, is because the business owns. And, you made that distinction when you became a father. Now you have 2 kids, and I got 2 daughters too. I really want to be there for them, right?
Yep.
All my research says we're not getting out of this alive, right? And so what we want to do is just make sure that the time that we're here, that we're enjoying those moments and the micro moments that, like, today I drove my daughter to work, came back and recorded this podcast and dropped them off in the morning. And when you have systems and approaches, it allows you to really be the best that you can be in multiple areas of your life. But you got to put into work, got to put into learning, but it's very doable.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So, we're not going to be able to talk to all your tools. And by the way, I think you've done an amazing job with the book, with the resources. I mean, you've left no stone unturned. Like Michael Gerber said in his intro to your book, like, people can literally just follow that and they can do the work. And so I commend you on your value for having a genuine desire to solve a problem that's needed, and then offering solutions and an ecosystem to help people, because most people will want support. But I thought you really did a spectacular job. One of the best books I've read, one of the best support systems for the book. So kudos to you and the team. It's definitely best in class. And I've read all kinds of books. I got them all. Just like you said, it's business leaders, you get a little geeky about these things, but kudos to you and your team. It truly is best in class. And amazing. So thank you for that. And I'm sure the audience will appreciate digging into your body of work as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're obviously not going to be able to go through all that because there's so much work, but the 7 stages, and then I want to talk a little bit about the CCF, the critical client flow, or customer journey. And, there's different names with that concept. But if we can go quickly at a high level, just for the audience's benefit, there's 7 stages. There's define, there's assign, there's extract, there's organize, there's integrate, there's scale, and then there's optimize. And if you can take maybe a minute or two and just talk to each of those at a high level, And I'd like to dig a little bit into the CCF because I really like that tool, and that's a great place for people to start, of course. And obviously, it's your first stage. But I'll let you kind of give us a little intro to each of the stages, and that'd be super helpful.
Yeah. So the first one, define, is actually where the critical client flow starts. The whole idea is to identify the first 10 to 15 systems that you will document. That seems to be the first question everybody has. Once they've decided, yes, I'm going to build a systems driven company, the next question they say is, and where do I start? What are the first 10 to 15 systems? And that's what the define stage answers. And there's a tool in there called the critical client flow that we can come back to in a moment. Then the second stage is assign. That has a lot to do with then figuring out where does that knowledge actually currently exist in your business. Tremendous wins can be gained from capturing what you're currently doing and just making it repeatable. It doesn't have to be world class. It doesn't have to be the best way. You can get to that point later. For now, just focus on repeatability. A great example of that is you think of McDonald's. McDonald's doesn't make the best hamburger. It just does the same hamburger consistently. And that's why people go to it. So I always say for stage number 2, just figure out who on your team does each of those tasks that you identified in step number 1 really well. And just start there and try and avoid the business owner where we can. Step number 3 is extract. That's all about getting the information out of the heads of those team members. How do we make it easy? Generally, your best team members are your busiest team members. And to get them to document their processes, they'll often go, yeah, look, that's important, but it's not urgent. And I've got 50 other things I need to do. So it sits on the to-do list. So you really need to think about how do we make this whole process as easy as possible? And the secret for this stage is to make sure it's a 2-person job. Get some person who has the knowledge and then get a second person who really helps with the documentation. And this stage has gotten infinitely easier. Talk about needing to adapt and change. With the introduction of AI, this whole process of documentation has been turned on its head, and it's infinitely easier than it's ever been. Then step number 4 is organize. That's just about having a central location where this knowledge exists. A lot of people might have some systems and processes, but some are on someone's desktop, some are on someone's Google Drive, some is sitting on a yellow post-it note stuck to their computer. And if it's everywhere, it's nowhere. So the key is to have a central location and build up this knowledge base for the business of how things are done. And that way we can start to train the team to go there. Step number 5 is integrate. That has to do with getting the team on board. So we need to make sure that there's buy-in and that each of the team members understands that there's a real benefit for them for following these systems and processes. How can they get a win from this? And that's how you start to build buy-in, and you'll make it stick, because it's not enough just to have your systems documented. Your team's got to follow them also. Step number 6 is scale. That has to do with what are the other systems required to grow. Like in step number 1, we only identified 10 to 15 systems, which gets you started. But the real goal, and what I talk about in step number 6, is reaching minimum viable systems. What is the minimum number of systems in your business to ensure that the essential tasks in each of the different departments get completed to an appropriate standard? And then the final stage is optimize. And this is what probably makes Systemology a little bit different from many of the other methodologies. When you're just starting out, Systemology focuses on what are you currently doing? Let's make it repeatable. Let's get everybody up to that stage, because you get tremendous wins. Then it's not until you get to the last stage where we start to think about optimization, and we look at how can we improve these processes? How do we put a dashboard in place to really listen to the business? And then how do you let the business tell you what areas need work? And I've started really using a metaphor to explain this now. Think of your business like the human body. the human body has all of these subsystems in it, the skeletal system, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system. Now, if any one of these subsystems are unhealthy, then your human body is unhealthy. And it's the same in business. Your business is a system and it has a range of subsystems: marketing, sales, operations, and finance management. And if any one of those subsystems is unhealthy, it'll bring down the health of your business. So the key, once you get to the optimize stage, is to really focus on where does your body need the most help and support, and you go to work on that particular piece of the business to raise the overall health of the business. And that's when you start to reach this viable stage and your business really starts to function without key person dependency.
Yeah, that's great. And I wanted to go back to a comment that you made around the scale, and you're right around the optimize. So talking with a friend of mine, he talked about this concept of MED, minimum effective dose, which is what are the minimum amount of resources, time, and money it takes to get from, to do that system. And I think it's always being circular in that in terms of the optimizations. You kind of go back around and around through the system to just like a feedback loop. And yeah, that's exactly how you make it an organization more viable. So I love that. That's really resonating with me versus the scalability of the different nuance. But it's I love that update. Now the critical client flow. There's a few steps in there, or there's 7 steps in there. Can you talk us through a little bit around that? And just to give a little example on each one as you go, just as you have in your book.
Yeah. So the whole idea for that critical client flow, again, is to answer the question, where do you start? What are the first 10 to 15 systems you're going to document? So I then say, well, what is the purpose of the business? The business needs to make money. So the critical client flow is about capturing the journey of the business to deliver value to a single target audience and then get paid for that. And we always remember that just because we don't document something doesn't mean it's going to magically stop happening in the business. So we're just capturing the critical systems in the delivery of that product or service. It's a very easy exercise. You just need an A4 bit of paper. You can use the template in the book, or you don't even need that. Just a blank bit of paper is fine. In the top left-hand corner, you start off by writing what is the dream client, the person that you would sell this product to. Then you think, what is that primary product or service? What you have to pick one service or product to start with. And then what we do is we map this linear journey that prospect, and then it turns into a client. And what does the business do to deliver that product and service? And it's very easy. Like, it's by design, I keep it very high level and very simple. It's just a series of boxes that you'll populate, these boxes, and you don't put more than 1 or 2 words in each. The whole process here is just for identification, and it helps you to understand what is currently going on in your business. That's actually one of the rules. Only capture what you're currently doing, not what you would like to be doing. And then write down, how do you grab someone's attention? How do you handle the incoming inquiry? What does your sales process look like? Are you jumping on a Zoom call and issuing out a proposal or whatever it might be for your business? How do you then collect the money? Do you get payment up front, or do you get payment at the end of the job? And then how do you onboard that client into your business? Like, is there a questionnaire that they have to fill out? Do you enter them into your project management platform, or is there a CRM system? Then we get down to the delivery piece, which is then how do we deliver the product or service? And then once that's done, how do we then hand that back over to the client? Some sort of handover, and either introducing to additional products and services or getting them to come back or refer. So it's that journey that you first capture high level, and then you effectively just capture it's almost like the blue skies version of that. If everything went smoothly, if the client said yes, if they chose this particular color widget, if everything was just perfect and the stars aligned and everything went smoothly, what would happen. And you just capture one path. You don't capture all of the different variations and, oh, if the client says this, then I'd do that. Or if we sell to residential, we would sell it like this, and commercial is like that. Like, strip away all of that and just get one linear journey and start there. And that just makes it infinitely easier and gives you a very clear focus on where to start.
Yeah, and I love your focus throughout the book around simplicity, because I think that's where other systems fail. They make things too complex. And the goal is if you have this 7 steps identified: attention, inquiry, sales, money, onboarding, delivery, and how to repeat. If you have, a booklet under each of those steps, which any company could, you can create a crazy amount of details if you so wanted, but then no one will follow it. And it becomes very cumbersome. And I love your approach in teaching John about being high level, because if someone has to hand it over, hey, this is my job, hand it over, there's enough steps and identification, a little bit of detail there that someone understands how you go from A to B, but not overcomplicate it, and also not restrict innovation. Because sometimes you get people that might want to stick to something too much. But that also, I find in my business experience, that can also choke innovation. Well, this is the way it's done. It can't be done any other way. There are multiple ways to have it done. And to your point, when you have that repeat and that optimization, when you hand it over to someone, or that person does it for the 87th time, they might have an aha moment, and then they can then optimize it. And I think that, like you said, it truly is an evergreen process.
I definitely feel the whole idea of McDonald's, and we've got to systemize like McDonald's, that to a certain extent, I think has made people think that they should be systemizing for the lowest common denominator. And they're assuming that we're getting 15-year-old kids off the street that need to learn how to do this thing at painstaking detail. I mean, that's where the whole idea of McDonald's has come from. And that's great if you're running a hamburger business, but a lot of your listeners here run different types of businesses. They might be running B2B businesses or service-based businesses where they employ highly skilled team members. So you've got to be really careful not to put so much detail that it becomes a repellent for smart people. So you have to document to the level that's required for the individual and the skill level. Like, yes, there are going to be some things that you'll need more detail if it's a very skilled if it's a very unskilled team member that's just getting started with you. Of course, you put more detail in there, but there might be other roles where you're employing someone who has skills and you don't need to tell them exactly how to do everything because they come pre-baked with a certain amount of knowledge. And it's finding that middle ground, which is a challenge when you're getting started, but makes all the difference.
Thank you. I just wrote down what you said because I love what you said. Don't be a repellent for smart people. I really like that, because bad system, bad culture will break good people. But if you just put a little bit of, I've always said, one of my quotes or things that I've always had in my books is, and I usually write it in my notebooks, is that discipline is the grease of performance. And that's what this is about, is documenting your performance, documenting your discipline in high level steps. And that's essentially a grease which makes you go faster and achieve that performance, versus if you put a lot of friction, all those details, it will just, that they say in aerospace, you get drag, and it really slows you down.
Yes. Yeah.
So of the 7 stages, in your experience, do you find, I might think the first stage people struggle the most with might be define, but maybe once they get going, are there certain stages that you found, these are the 2 tough ones that people struggle with, or is it usually pretty one of them? What's your experience? Share with us there.
Yeah, it's quite common that the biggest one people struggle with is step number 5, integrate, which is getting the team on board, which has to do with building a systems culture. Especially now, it's easier than ever to get all of your processes documented using AI and some of the new tools. But then how do you create a transparent, accountable culture where it is clear who is doing what by when and exactly how that is done, and the expectation of what is required for team members is very clear. And then even more importantly, how do you then manage that? What do you do when someone doesn't follow process, even though it may be clear? that whole piece is most definitely the most challenging. And the thing that I recommend the most these days, I feel like it is the biggest leverage point that I've discovered, is this idea of you need to have someone who is responsible on the team for process that is not the business owner. We call them a systems champion. You just need someone on the team whose job it is to keep systems and processes front and center, to work with the team, to celebrate system wins, to help support those knowledgeable team members. That is the biggest piece that I've been working on probably for the last few years now. It's like, how do I really get to the nuts and bolts of that and make that very clear?
One of the things I learned in my second year, I studied Philip Kotler, the 8 stages of change management. So I am not surprised to hear that that is the one that meets the most challenge. I think what people have to remember, despite there's all this AI stuff and all this technology, it's still human. Like it's
Yeah,
always people. So until like we're completely eradicated by machines, which I think won't happen, we wouldn't let that happen. And it's the wrong thing. We're like dolphins. We're social. We're meant to, I do think we'll have a snapback. Where we're over technology, right? We're starting to see that where more and more people are shutting off their social media accounts because it gets a little bit too much to process.
yeah,
But ultimately, change management has killed many an organization. And, the whole book, Who Moved My Cheese, lots of
yeah,
big organizations talk about that. But I think that the trick is, and I think that's an important nuance for the audience, is that, as you think about developing your systemology approach and learning from here, is knowing that that's a roadblock you're going to get, and start thinking about the change management. The nuance that you said, and I think it's really important, is like we have to do this versus this is the way we do things.
yeah,
It's about your job. Like I love talking about business. I don't have to do this. I get to do this because I enjoy it. And I think when you
yeah,
build a ritual-based culture around that, I think that's when you can unlock. And in my experience, personally and professionally, is you may not have the same people on the bus from when you start, from when you finish. Not because
yeah,
the quote unquote process eliminates them. In fact, it protects them more than anything.
yeah,
However, you're going to get resistance, and I think being cognizant of the impact of change management and the fact that one or two, or whatever percentage of your workforce may not be on the bus when you're done, but then you'll be able to bring people in from a cultural perspective and a fit perspective that will embrace what the business owner or division, the business leader is trying to do. I think that that's an important piece for the audience to consider, and don't be naive about it, because it's one of the hardest things to do is
yeah.
change management. So, but it's the most powerful when you get to the other side.
And the bigger you get, the harder it becomes. The easiest time you will have to change culture and build a systems driven business is now. It doesn't actually get easier the longer you leave it, because you want to start planting seeds and building evidence and proving and showing the team that you are systems driven. And the more people you add into an organization, it just gets harder. So that's why I actually find it's very challenging with some of the larger corporates that come across Systemology. Once you're more than about 50 or 60 staff, to try and backwards insert this, it's just be aware you're going to have to break a lot of habits, and that's hard.
There's a friend of mine, and he's on your continent, Simon Bowen. He's
Yes.
up in Perth. I was at a keynote speaking that he did. I'm in a similar mastermind as him. The chart that I love that he did was it's a triangle, and it says there's sort of status quo, then there's chaos, and then there's progress. And so progress is on the other side of chaos. So anytime you want to make any form of change,
Yeah.
and I think that depending on the size of change will determine the duration of the chaos. But
Yes.
knowing that you're going to go through, like, it's never smooth, no matter how well you plan it. There's always something unexpected, and that's okay. I think just having the resilience and going back, and what I love about your stuff is that you've got rails, right? Like this thing is about putting rails in the organization and keeping things on and really making things go smoother, go faster. But at times you're going to go through that iteration process from status quo, chaos, progress, and you just keep
Yeah.
leveling up. And yeah, so it's no surprise the bigger the organization, maybe a bit more challenging the chaos may be. But and again, that's a whole other separate discussion on how do you tackle it for different sides of organization. But I guess before we wrap up in a few minutes, we'd love to know about, there's a lot of myths that you debunk in the book. And, from that perspective, like what are the common myths that you do encounter and what do you say? Like what is the best way that you find, what are the common myths that you find and how do you debunk them? Sorry,
Yeah.
getting tongue-tied over here. I'm a little bit dry, a little dehydrated.
The common ones that pop up firstly is people think they're going to need hundreds and hundreds of systems. Once they start to think about systemization, they think there's a little bit of an overwhelm there because of the sheer number of things that go on in the business. And I hinted at this a little bit earlier, just because you don't systemize something doesn't mean it's going to magically stop happening. And you talk a lot about this. I probably don't talk enough about it. This idea that great people will help to fill in a lot of the gaps. So the systems really are about setting standards for things that you want done a certain way. And your great team members will fill in the gaps where you don't have something documented. So I suppose that's the important thing to think about. That's why we really think about the 80-20 and the myth being you're going to need hundreds and hundreds of systems. There's probably a lot less to get to the point where you really notice the change inside your business. There's other myths like that another common one is that the business owner is going to need to document everything. And the business owner is, generally speaking, the worst person to be documenting for a variety of reasons. One, they don't have any time, but two, they often try and make the system the way they would like it to be, not the way that it is, which then means you're trying to optimize and trying to work on the engine as you're flying the plane. Like, you're much better off going, well, this is the way that we do things, and let's let that run. Then let's go over here and then start optimizing and fixing. Great. Now we're going to insert that back in to replace that part. That works infinitely more effectively. So taking the business owner out of the equation is always a good thing when it comes to documentation, because tremendous wins come from making what you're currently doing repeatable. Look, there are other misconceptions, things like that you're going to need some complex software to do things. Like you mentioned that right at the start. It's a theme through all of my work, is you want to really look for the simplest solution, because simplicity scales much easier because there are less moving parts. It's less complicated. So that's why simple scales, complex fails. And that's something you want to keep front and center. And another common misconception is that you should systemize like McDonald's, which I kind of hinted at. The idea that I don't think there's probably any listeners right now that are running a hamburger shop. So you don't need to follow exactly what McDonald's does. Yes, they've done some great things and there's a lot that can be learned, but your business and situation is a little bit different. They've also been systemizing for 60 years. You're just getting started. So you don't look at the end picture of where McDonald's is after they've been doing it for 60 years and try and start there. You need to think about where to get started, how to set the right framework, what are the minimum number of systems, how do you build this culture that then will grow into something magical, but you have to first start with the right seeds. So that's a few of them. There's a lot of things that get in the way of business owners making this work. For me, the best thing that you can do is just get started and as I said, just appreciate that this is a marathon without a finish line. You're changing the way that you're doing things. Don't expect to go, oh yes, we've documented 50 systems, we're now a systemized business, because there's more to it than that. But remembering that the rewards here are worth it and the payoff is significant, and the work that you put in up front will pay in spades on the other end. So it's worth making that commitment.
And you make a really good point earlier around everyone judges people if you're looking at a 10 million, 20 million, whatever size. you only see the tip of the iceberg and you're saying, well, I want to be like them. But if you're a $1 or $2 million business, you cannot be like a 20 or $30 million. It's just different. So I think to your point, an owner might want it to be a certain way, but documenting what it is and make it happen is an important reminder to meet yourself where you're at, document that to scale it. And you're wearing something on your shirt, and it's a System Hub. So before we do wrap, can you let us know a little bit, the audience know about your System Hub software and how it helps? And I'll put the link to it, of course, in the show notes.
Yeah, perfect. So it's just a place to store all the knowledge for your team. It stores your systems, your processes, and your policies and your training all in one location with a lot of the Systemology thinking built into the software. So it's simple by design. And the idea is you just have to start capturing this knowledge. I feel like systems and processes are one of the most valuable assets in the business. I'd almost argue that it's as important as your people because the people will come and go. The only true asset that you actually own are the processes. And it becomes there's a compounding effect that happens. Every system and process improves just a small part of your business that ensures something's done to a particular standard consistently. And you start to stack those wins on top of each other, and that's where you have sort of a significant breakthrough. So I feel like System Hub is a piece of that, but I think, like you mentioned right at the start, it's really a much larger ecosystem. The software is part of it, training is part of it, community is part of it, to make sure that someone gets on this path towards systemization and stays on it.
Yeah, and I agree. Thank you for that. I'll put a link to your show note. Also, the video I think you did about System Hub, where there's all this chaos in the office with the music, and then all of a sudden settled down. That really resonated with me, and I actually completely agree with you that if you're looking at making a business viable, the systems and the processes would be would give you the power of goodwill. And ultimately, why are some of our biggest and most valuable brands in the world, they're built by systems, right? Like there's a way to do things. People come and go. Why is Coke such a great brand? It's been there. Starbucks. It's run by thousands of people across the globe, but they come and go. But they follow the mantra, the DNA, the way they do things. And maybe you can be the Starbucks of your community and whatever someone is doing. But with that, thank you for your drips of knowledge. That was a great conversation. I love your body of work, your book launch, and literally best in class. No shock that Michael Gerber reached out to you. And like you said in your book, you would not forget this audience. David decided to help him for free for 60 or 90 days. And his business ran and grew while he was not there. And so if you put yourself in a position to do a passion project like that, you can do stuff like that too. And you can't put a price on helping somebody and working on a project that's priceless. You couldn't buy that. So if you didn't do what you did, that experience and the relationship you built would not be possible. And so I encourage the audience to really dive into the details. It'll probably be one of the most rewarding and powerful things you do for your business. And it would either improve your financial outcome when you sell it, or will definitely improve your life as a leader and business owner. So thank you, David, so much. Really appreciate your time and expertise here today.
Pleasure. And thank you so much for your support.
Absolutely. I was there for you. Thanks.